Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Welcome so much. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. I'll turn the floor over to you so you can introduce our speaker. Hello, Adobea. Welcome, everyone. Ardashana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome to the session, everyone. I'd like to give a brief introduction about myself, our organization, and introduce a wonderful speaker for today. My name is Adarshana, and I currently work as a grant sport program coordinator at the Real Estate Foundation of BC. I moved to Canada from India 9 years ago, in order to pursue my master's in land and water systems at the University of British Columbia. After graduating from UBC, I started my career here, and it required a lot of hard work and perseverance to secure my first job. I secured my first job through volunteering. So, over the past 8 years, I've worked in various sectors, including environmental and social services, which eventually brought me to my current role as a program coordinator at the Real Estate Foundation of BC. I've been here for the last 3.5 years. If you haven't met us, the Real Estate Foundation of BC is a philanthropic organization. We are working to advance sustainable, equitable, and socially just land use across British Columbia. We make grants to support projects in 5 priority areas, which is mainly land use, freshwater, built environments, food sovereignty, and real estate profession. The work we fund includes law and policy reform, applied research, community engagement, professional education, and public education. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion and reconciliation are the core values we have at REFBC. So we truly appreciate the important work that Minerva BC does to advance gender equity in the workplace and support women in leadership. And we are very happy to be a returning sponsor of the Inclusive Leadership Forum. With that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Adobea Foli. In this session, she will invite us to think about how resilience can be a very powerful force for personal and collective growth. She's a career coach, strategist, and speaker dedicated to guiding newcomers and mid-career professionals to career transformation and growth in Canada. She is an MBA graduate from UBC and has held key roles at TELUS and Lululemon. Since 2017, she has partnered with organizations that support newcomers, young professionals, and students. In 2023, she founded Adobea Foli Coaching and Consulting, offering tailored workshops, career resources, and speaking engagements to empower diverse talent and simplify the job search process. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you all I see all the loves and I really appreciate all that. I'm just gonna share my screen now. Okay, you all see my screen? Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you from the traditional and ceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Semiahmoo, Katsi, and Kwantlen nations, also known as South Surrey in BC. I honor and I give thanks to the Indigenous communities who have stewarded this land from time immemorial and continue to do so today. Thank you all for being here today to talk about something that we all hold in high regard: resilience. So now I would like us to open up a poll. Maybe you all be able to see this shortly. So when you think about resilience, what feeling typically comes to mind? Is it something that makes you feel empowering, or does it bring up draining? So does it have more of a positive feeling or a negative feeling? And just as you see on the screen, how people feel so differently when they hear the word resilience. Some people feel really empowered by hearing that word resilient. Other people feel drained. And we'll talk through this theme throughout the rest of the presentation. So, say majority of people feel empowering when they hear the word resilience, and a few people actually feel draining. I belong to one of the people who feel that draining whenever people say you're resilient, or when I typically hear the word resilience. Okay, a little bit about me. I know I was previously introduced. I'm a career coach and a speaker, and I particularly focus on new immigrants and students and mid-career professionals. I work with folks to help them have high-paying and fulfilling careers here in Canada. Just need to close the poll on my screen. And in my talk today, I am going to be exploring the traditional views of resilience. And then we're also going to look at a new way and a nuanced approach of looking at resilience. And through sharing my story and experience, I'll also share with you a few practical strategies of how we can implement a redefined view of resilience. And we'll also have some time at the end for questions. So traditionally, resilience is the ability to stay strong, bounce back after diversity, being able to push through challenges no matter how difficult they seem. And right, and typically what we do is we celebrate this version of resilience because it showcases strength and endurance and perseverance. And I have to admit, for a long time, I also embraced the idea of resilience because in my own life, I felt like in order to succeed, I had to be strong, I had to be resourceful. We heard from some of our previous panelists that said, typically immigrant women or people feel marginalized communities or women feel like we typically have to go above and beyond. We have to be the ones that are strong. We have to be individually capable in order to achieve what we're looking to achieve. And so resilience would mean like you're strong. It means that you're resourceful. It means you're able to go through the fire all by yourself. And what I'm realized today is that this traditional view of resilience, it is really incomplete. It can hurt us, especially when we carry the burden of resilience by ourselves. And what I want to share with you is a personal story. I was determined to make it when I first came to Canada as an immigrant. I had the mindset that if I worked hard enough, if I pushed through the cultural differences and I kept bouncing back from rejection after rejection, I would succeed. And I told myself I had to be resilient because that was the only way to make it in a new country. And this is really where the harmful traditional concepts of resilience lies. Like we think of it in terms of individual strength, and that we put the entire responsibility on ourselves to be the ones to tough it out. And while there is value in being able to persevere, this mindset is detrimental, especially for women and marginalized communities, because resilience on its own, resilience alone is not enough. The systems that are around us that place us in these high expectations to be overcomers, to be able to overcome the barriers, they shouldn't exist in the first place. And when we feel that the responsibility is on us to be stronger and that we encourage hardiness and we encourage grit. And this often leads to burnout. So there is a nuanced approach to resilience. Is this really resilience? Or is this a cycle that asks too much of us while really offering us very little in return? And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that this traditional view, it doesn't really honor our humanity. It doesn't really consider the real structural barriers. It doesn't recognize that the burden is not really only on us, but on us, on the systems that we operate within. So today I really want to invite us to think about resilience differently. Instead of seeing it as an individual burden, what if we thought of resilience as something that requires community and renewal and commitment? Something that is as much about receiving support as about being strong. It just only includes rest and reflection and accountability for those systems that challenge us. So I'm going to go through my story as I go through this presentation. After a few years of living in Canada, I was going through months through where I was struggling. And in the panelists before, you will go through those difficult times where you really reach sort of a breaking point. And I started to feel drained. I was doing everything that I thought that I should do. I was strong. I wasn't asking for help as much. And I kept going, even though I was feeling completely overwhelmed. So really, instead of thriving, I was burning out. And the weight of carrying everything on my own, it was becoming too much. I was resilient. I always got that feedback from my manager that I'm very resilient, but it was exhausting. And honestly, it can be isolating. And so I began to wonder, is resilience really about pushing through alone, or is it something missing from my understanding of what it truly means to be resilience? And I want to break these down through these three buckets where it was about building a network and community. Because resilience doesn't have to be a solo journey. It's stronger when we lean on others. And I discovered this when I finally started to reach out to others who had gone through similar experiences. And resilience isn't just constantly about pushing forward without rest. It is about renewal. It's about taking the time to recover and to recharge. And commitment. Resilience also means committing to change, not just for ourselves, but for the systems that are around us. And true resilience isn't about just holding ourselves accountable, but demanding that the structures that we operate also do the same. And I believed showing any signs of help would be a sign of weakness. So, what I want to go through is the way in which we redefine and look at resilience, and is about having a support system. So, when you think of someone like Maya Angelou, who speaks about the importance of community and connection, she says in her powerful words, no one can make it out here alone. So I reached out to mentors and peers, and they shared their wisdom, and they validated me, and they encouraged me, and we support each other through the tough times. And so resilience really, it thrives when we surround ourselves with a network of people who lift us up. And there's a quote from Jennifer Williamson about rest. It says, rest feels like every cell is thanking you for taking care of you. Its calm is not full of checklists or chores. And rest is really a critical part of resilience. It allows us to come back stronger, to approach your challenges with a clear mind and fresh energy. And there was a point in my journey where I realized that constantly pushing myself without rest, it just wasn't sustainable for me. I was always on. I was thinking that if I slow down, I will fall behind. But this relentless pace, it was wearing me out. And I finally allowed myself to take a step back to rest and really prioritize my mental and emotional well-being. And I took a 3-week sabbatical, something that was offered at my employer. And once I did that, I found that I was able to approach my challenges with a clearer mind and a renewed sense of energy. And the pause, it wasn't a setback, it was necessary for my resilience. And really, what I want to leave you with is that rest isn't a luxury, it's an essential part of resilience. You have to give yourself that permission to pause, to reflect and to recover. And you find that when you return from rest, you'll be more capable of actually facing the challenges ahead. And I also want to talk about advocacy and making a commitment to change. So, James Baldwin said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And what this reminds us of is that it's not really just about personal strength again, it's about holding the systems we're in accountable for the challenges that they have created. And at one point, I realized that resilience is not going to be enough if the environment around me isn't changing. So I started advocating for more inclusive practices within my workplace. It wasn't just about making my own path easier, it's about creating a culture that would support others facing the same struggles. So I began pushing for changes that didn't just address like surface level issues, but look at the systemic barriers we all face. Holding your organizations accountable for creating an equitable environment was just as important as my ability to bounce back. And true resilience, again, is not personal, it's not just on you. It has to be creating that accountability within the systems around you. And so you advocate for changes in your workplace, in your community, and resilience will thrive when the environment that you're in also supports you. So now what I'm going to do is like take us through some practical strategies that individuals can take on your own, and then some practical strategies that employers can also take. So for individuals, one of the persons that I look up to is Angela Davis, and she says, I'm no longer accepting the things that I cannot change. I am changing the things that I cannot upset. And this speaks to the idea that resilience is about enduring and taking action to change your circumstances. So one of the key things that I talked about in my own personal journey is about this support system and creating a support system for yourself. And so what you want to do is start by identifying and building your support, whether you're looking for mentors, whether you're going to be working with your colleagues, or even joining professional organizations and professional groups. So you first want to reflect on the challenges that you're having. Like, what am I going through right now? What is something that I'm struggling with? What is an area where I need support? And this kind of clarity will help you identify if you need a mentor, if you need an ally. There's also sponsors, whether you need a champion. What exactly are you going to need in this time or in this challenge that you are facing? And so you will reach out to allies. You will look through people that are within your network, people within your industry, or people who have the experience and the skills that you're looking for. So you look through and think about your current colleagues that work with you, or your former supervisors, your professional contact, like people that you know that you potentially admire and you want to reach out to. So you can join some communities. I belong to the Immigrant Women Initiative. I belong to the Forum. I belong to the Lean In community. There's so many different communities out there that have shared values that you can start to reach out to and build some of these relationships with. And then when it comes to rest, a lot of people think about rest, they think about going to the spa, or you think about something elaborate like getting a massage. And sometimes rest can be as simple as assessing where you are. Where are you right now in your body? Do you feel drained? Is it difficult to get out of bed every morning? Are you hitting that snooze button all the time? How easy is it for you to go through your day? You assess where you feel in your body, you assess what you're feeling right now, and then you schedule rest. Do I need to schedule a 10-minute break today? Do I need to schedule one day off? Do I need to schedule a couple of weeks off? A lot of people have this idea that you have to take a vacation for rest. And sometimes just taking a mental break, taking a screen break is something that you need for rest. And rest really isn't this luxury idea that people tend to have. It's very crucial to be able to rest if you want to develop and grow your resilience. You'll be able to recharge, you'll be able to get clear and approach your challenges with renewed energy. Because we are living in a culture that really glorifies the hustle. It's always about pushing through exhaustion. But one of the things that Octavia Butler reminds us of is that rest is essential. It's not optional. And I learned this the hard way when I hit a wall in my career and I was pushing myself beyond my limits. I get to the point where you convince that the more you work, it'll eventually yield the result, that you're striving for this title, or you're striving for this promotion, and I just need to keep going. But then when I found myself completely drained and I'm really lacking the energy to even face small challenges, even lacking the energy to spend time with my small children, it wasn't until I learned to take intentional breaks that things changed. And you step away, and I spent time with my family. I took up activities that had nothing to do with work. And it was really just amazing the difference that it made in my creativity. I was felt more energized, and the focus that I was able to feel, when I took that sabbatical. But sometimes even booking and scheduling a few minutes or even 10 minutes stretch break, a screen break, really can make a difference. So really schedule those intentional rest periods to recharge. Now we're talking about advocating for change. And so resilience is really not just about enduring. It's about having the courage to advocate for change within yourself and within your environment. When I started working, like many people, you notice that these barriers that make it harder for people like me to progress. For a long time, I just stayed silent thinking, this is just how things are. I've come into a different country. This is just what it's like. I just have to work harder. I just have to keep my head above the water. But over time, I realized that if I really didn't speak up, nothing was going to change. So I started small. I'll speak up about bias that I noticed during meetings. I'll suggest ways to be more inclusive. Slowly but surely, I started taking a lot of little, making, a lot of suggestions here and there. And I saw the changes actually take place, not just for myself, but for others who felt marginalized. One thing you can do is start to identify these areas in your workplace or in your career that feels like a barrier. It could be a lack of diversity in decision making. It could be biased job descriptions or even unfair workloads. Start a conversation with a colleague that you trust. Bring it up in a team meeting. Your voice matters, and the change will begin when you start to face what needs to be addressed. So advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to speak up for what you need. And if you find it difficult to speak up in a team setting, you start with a colleague. You start with, going to your town halls or to your different organization and submitting anonymous questions. However it is that you feel that you're able to speak up and get your voice out there, you have to start to, advocate for yourself, either asking for more resources, advocating for policy changes, and always remember that your voice matters. And once I started to apply these principles in my career and start to build allies within my organization, I began advocating for the changes that I needed to thrive, and it paved the way for others to follow. And it wasn't just about me, it was about ensuring the environment was more supportive for everyone. Now, employers can play a critical role in fostering an environment where resilience can truly thrive. And organizations, they thrive when they actively build and nurture this inclusive support systems. And one of the ways is to establish employee resource groups, either creating an employee resource group where underrepresented groups can have safe spaces for them to connect, for them to share their experiences and find mentorship. They talked about this in the previous panel. Employers can create structured mentorship programs. But what we typically find is that mentorship can help you, someone can help you move along, they can help teach you. What really moves people along in their career is sponsors. And sometimes you have to create some of these structured sponsorship or out of mentorship programs grow to be able to develop sponsors for people. Because what the sponsor does is they typically go to bat for you, and the sponsor is what would actually make a difference between helping you overcome something versus putting your name up and for speaking up for you when you are not in the room. And another way is to also have inclusive training. It's important to provide ongoing training for managers and for leaders on inclusive practices, equipping them with the skills to recognize unconscious bias, promoting equity and supporting employees from all backgrounds. And a thriving workforce feels rested and balanced and supported in managing their well-being. And employers have a role to play here in fostering that environment where people feel like they can rest. People feel like they can take a rest. Some people feel if I take a vacation, I'm going to get punished for it. Because the environment that they work in doesn't really doesn't really encourage them to rest. And so we want to have employers that have flexible work and flexible work arrangements, like being able to have remote work, being able to have compressed weeks and flexible work hours that accommodate different lifestyles and responsibilities. Most employers here have mandatory time off. It's something that's mandated, but they don't encourage it. They don't encourage and check in with their employees who haven't taken time off. And it just reinforces this importance of rest, and it really prevents burnout. And also promoting the mental health resources. There's so many mental health resources that are available. Some people have it somewhere on their website, but promoting them actively, bringing in counselors when there's some certain things happen at the organization. It's important to take away that stigma that people have, that there's all this opportunity to use these mental health resources, but you find people are not actually taking advantage of them. And according to the American Psychological Association, it finds that employees who feel supported in maintaining a healthy work-life balance, they're 2.5 times more likely to be satisfied with their jobs. And this is the big one where companies actually hold themselves accountable for the inclusive practices, for these DEI policies that they're putting in place. You're actually holding yourself accountable. And a McKinsey and Company report finds that employees who feel that they can actually advocate for change within their companies, they're 3.5 times more likely to be engaged at work. And so companies and employers need to continuously evaluate the systems that are within their organizations. Are they truly equitable? Are these barriers that preventing their employees from succeeding? Are they having regular assessments of their policies and practices? Are they committing to sharing those audits with their employees? Are they being transparent in reporting on their either their inclusive goals and letting people know this is what we're tracking, this is the progress that we're looking to make in some of these inclusive practices, and this is where we are, this is where we're still struggling, and sharing that openly with their employees. And also having two-way dialogue, having listening session with their underrepresented and marginalized employees, having open forums where employees can feel safe in sharing their thoughts, where companies are listening, taking the feedback, and also being transparent about the areas that they need to improve. And in my experience, the workplaces that prioritize creating inclusive environments, resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. And for the organizations that hold themselves accountable and their employees can focus on growing and succeeding rather than just enduring. And so these are a few examples of some practical strategies that both individuals and employers can take that align with my redefined view of resilience. It's a shared journey of community and renewal and accountability. It's not enough to keep bouncing back from the same challenges. We need to work towards changing the systems that create those challenges in the first place. And so this is the new way I want us to view resilience as something that's not just about enduring, but thriving with the help of your community, with the help of rest, and with the help of commitment to lasting change. And I want to thank you all so much for having me here. If you would like to learn more about me or to get in touch with me, you can visit my website at adobeafoli.com, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Adobea. I really appreciate the lens that you bring to have a deeper look at resilience. It's something we talk about a lot at Minerva, especially working with women leaders in our leadership programs, is to not perpetuate the idea that it's just about a bubble bath or, going shopping or self-care, that it has to go deeper. And it is about community, it is about structures, and it is about advocacy and support. And so I just feel like you've given a deeper lens to this conversation that often can be at the surface and quite superficial. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. There's a few questions that have popped up in the chat. I invite folks to drop some more in the Q&A. I'll keep my eyes open there. But one of the questions was like about rest. And so your very clear message that rest is essential. But what if you are in that dynamic in a workplace where the pace doesn't allow for that, or the understanding isn't there, or the support for that isn't there? We heard yesterday in our forum a lot about sort of time gaps and availability of time and expectations of, sort of being able to work extra hours, or sort of even wages and higher positions being linked to that expectation of more. So what's your advice for people navigating that space and that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's where the importance of allyship comes, right? So sometimes you can be in an organization where, you see in HR, you see the organization talk about how rest is important and mental health is important, but then there's something that we call like a subculture, right? So your manager doesn't believe in any of that, or the team that you work with doesn't believe in any of that. Like your manager praises and prioritizes people who working beyond hours. So you're existing in a subculture where the person who's directly responsible for your growth or your promotion doesn't really believe in rest. And this is where an ally within the organization comes about. Someone who is, by reaching out to people to say, or reaching out to someone that you know, like a colleague of yours would say, well, my manager is amazing. Like he tells us it's so important to take the afternoon off. I got an email saying that it was sunny time off. Once you build that kind of ally, that person will get you to be able to talk directly to your manager, because sometimes it involves having somebody else step in. It involves you sometimes saying, oh, you'd like to reach out to HR. HR will say, oh, we can come and speak to your team in general about mental health and about balance. And I believe it's always about finding allies within the organization that have those values, that believe in rest. And then for people who are interested in getting either coaching or counseling, if it's a completely toxic environment where the entire organization is just doesn't believe in that, then you yourself have to start to build out your network to eventually get yourself out of that organization to a place where you can actually get a place to rest and a place that believes in work-life balance.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. And it is hard sometimes to navigate, especially if you don't have power or you don't have, but building those connections, those relationships, finding the allyship. And I also think the value to the organization, right, around productivity, health and wellness, those are also anchoring points for that conversation that may
Yeah,
lead into either the business values, the business objectives of an organization that helps open the door for that conversation.
yeah.
Um, there was a question about KPIs and resiliency, and what would that look like, or what kind of measures of resiliency can you offer to the group?
Measuring your own resilience.
I'm not sure it was in the chat, so maybe answer it from whatever perspective you like, either if you're sort of an individual trying to evaluate, because you offered a lot about self-reflection, but also from your position and having worked sort of in organizational leadership, is there a way that you can also encourage managers to think about that for their teams?
Yeah, I think it depends on some organizations, like in their performance evaluation, measure like a person's like leadership ability. They measure people's emotional intelligence. You know, they're not specific KPIs that you can measure, but there's ways that you can evaluate someone's ability, someone's emotional intelligence. So you can evaluate somebody's temperament, somebody's ability to kind of bounce back. But in terms of like official KPIs, there's nothing that comes to mind.
Thank you. Thank you. But I think also when you were just giving the example of the manager who's like, it's sunny, it's time off, I think there's also ways as leaders to say, like, how am I building in communication, or how am I demonstrating my commitment to this? How am I demonstrating and eliciting that? One of the practices I've seen increasingly is in an email signature, because there's also the balance of flexible work
Yeah.
and what that can mean. So I'm often online late at night or on the weekends, but that's not an expectation I hold of my team.
Yes.
And I've seen a practice more recently also of people sort of including on their signatures, I am working flexible time hours. There's not an expectation of a response when you get this, but I'm kind of doing my own thing here. So I think
Exactly.
that's also valuable when you're explicit about taking time, including like, I'm leaving to pick up my kids, or I'm
Yep.
leaving to attend a soccer game, or whatever the context is, that people see
Yeah.
leaders enacting that. So
Yeah. One of the ways I have like scheduled pickup and scheduled drop off, and my calendar is open in my Outlook so folks can see this is my scheduled pickup time, this is my scheduled drop off time. And then sometimes when I'm home with two sick kids, I put it in my team status message. I'm home with two sick kids, that I'm going to be slow to respond. And the more people see other people be open about what is happening in their personal life, putting it in their team status message, you realize that you're in an environment that respects that and welcomes that and appreciates that, versus hiding the fact that you've got like a sick kid at home and you don't want anybody to know, you're just trying to like still have your sick child at home and still trying to pick up daycare, you're driving. But folks always know that this is my scheduled pickup time and drop off time, and I have sick kids, so I'm going to be slow to respond. So making that communication open enough, it really helps people feel comfortable that this is a place that understands that people have lives outside of work.
yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the speakers on day one, Elaine Lynn Herring, a lot of her message is about creating a culture of voice. And one of
Mhm.
the strategies around that is creating and making communication quite open and transparent and multiple channels, so that there's
Yeah.
also different ways that that is seen throughout the organization, that matches and mirrors and gives different inroads in for employees to have those conversations. And you had mentioned earlier as well, finding a trusted colleague or a team or an
Yeah.
HR person or an ally in the
Mhm.
organization And I think that's part of it too, is sort of where are you building relationships? Where are you navigating so that you can find open doors for that
Yes.
conversation? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. There's a question here in the Q&A, and I see, Jessica, you raised your hand. If you can pop your question, if it's possible, in the Q&A, I'll answer it, or I'll pose it to Adobea and she will answer it. But we have an attendee who put a question in. What if your high performance has encouraged management to give you more work instead of a promotion without higher pay? What if you cannot leave work because you have a mortgage to pay and a family to feed? So I think this is addressing your comment of maybe you need to leave a space that isn't valuing rest.
So what if you're a high performer and
What if you
you're
are a high performer
Mhm.
And your high performance has encouraged management to give you more work? So you're producing, you're productive, and you're leveling up, but you're not getting a promotion, you're not getting higher pay, but the expectation is there, and you can't leave that job because of maybe financial constraints of family and mortgage.
Yeah, I think this comes into the advocating for yourself piece, where as difficult as it is, you have to have some of these conversations with your manager. You have to know and understand what the promotion policy is, and have it in writing. Like, have a meeting, book a one-on-one with your manager to say, hey, I've been working these are the things that I've achieved, these are the goals that I achieved. I'd like to review our promotion policy. And let the manager tell you, that you can note it down and write it down and say, this is what it takes to be promoted. You have to be either achieve this, you have to grow in scope. When companies don't have clear promotion policies, it's very easy for a manager to take advantage of someone who's a high performer and just keep working them and working them. If you and that person have that conversation that this is what it means. So though if they give you a really high bar, that this is the bar that you have to cross in order to be promoted at this company, you need to have that written down. You need to have that policy clear. And when you are meeting that bar, you have to get to the point where you advocate for yourself. Was we had this conversation at the beginning of the year. You said I needed to achieve X, 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 and X. I have achieved X, X, and X. This is the promotion. You need to talk to your HR. You need to talk to your manager's manager. Book those critical meetings with your manager's manager, and get a very clear understanding of what it takes to be promoted in your organization. And it might take you 6 months, but at the beginning of this time, you get that clear understanding written down. You write down the notes, you send an email saying, hey, we had this conversation, I'm looking to get promoted. You mentioned that points A to C is what I need to achieve to get promoted. If you achieve those points 6 months down the line and they come up with another excuse, or they keep raising the bar to be promoted, this is where you need to go above your manager. And this is where advocating for yourself involves speaking to the people who have that decision-making power and saying, I had this meeting with my manager. He said this is what I needed to achieve. If you can actually prove that you've achieved what they said you needed to achieve. But usually people are like, oh, what does it take to be promoted? And the manager says, oh, you need to do X and Y. And they're like, okay, they don't have it written down. They can't go back. They can't hold the manager accountable for giving them those points that they said they needed to get promoted.
So perhaps in this case, there is sort of a conversation around like, I notice I'm doing, just wanted to recognize I've taken on these extra tasks. It is my goal to be promoted. Can we have a conversation about how this is leading to that goal that I have, or something?
Yeah, and then you schedule those meetings with your manager. If he says, come back to me in 6 months, you schedule that meeting in 6 months, and you keep holding them accountable. But it's important that if you're advocating yourself, you're keeping these in writing. You're scheduling those meetings, and you're giving yourself 6 months to a year. If this doesn't happen within that same time, like you have a mortgage to pay. So if you're going to find another job, you're going to be interviewing whilst you're working, and you've given yourself that time to even tracking down your achievements will also serve you in looking for another job. It'll serve you in even looking within your same company to say, these are the things that I've achieved. It gets more and more important for you to track things down, for you to record things, and for you to book those scheduled check-in time frames with your manager and with your manager's manager as well.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting conversation of like stepping into that role of self-advocacy, asking questions, and then also recognizing that sometimes we are working with leaders and managers who haven't received training, or information isn't being passed well to them, or there is a lack of transparency and clarity of what they are able to do, not do, advocate for. And so it sort of becomes sort of interwoven into the organization, how it manages. But I agree with you that taking the responsibility to open the door, be clear about your needs and your wants in terms of your promotion and your progression, and then getting the feedback on, okay, well, this is what I was told, and help me understand further. The more you ask questions, it feeds into Shobna's feedback in the earlier conversation of, if you don't ask, you don't, or Sandia's comment about,
Yeah,
if you don't ask, you don't know. And if you're not told, then how do you get clarity? And that's just
exactly.
pieces of information that help you along the way. And I do think anytime you're evaluating to stay or to go, it's patterns and it's progression and it's kind of repeated things that may help you kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, maybe to level up, I do need to leave, or maybe to kind of have the opportunities I need will require it, but you can do it in a planned way. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Adobea does career coaching. So you can see that her recommendations and her skills certainly come from the work she's done, both in an organization and also now independently as a coach. So just having a quick scan here. I think there's one more question here about mentorship. So I think it probably builds on your last answer, but what if there is limited mentorship available in your organization? Or earlier, someone in our first session talked about the need for mentorship to go beyond superficial, and maybe mentors are not trained that well to do that. How would you respond to that, of someone seeking it and maybe not having the access they need and want?
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations that actually do have mentorship programs. I used to volunteer with Women in Leadership Vancouver chapter that had a mentorship program. And every year we would actually struggle to get applicants because it's not widely known. There's forums, there's the Lean In, there's organizations that offer mentorship, so many organizations that offer mentorship. And mentorship happening organically is the best. But sometimes you can reach out to someone that you admire and ask the person to mentor you, and the person truly doesn't have the time, or the person is not truly as invested in you to mentor you. If your organization doesn't have structured mentorship programs, there are organizations, there are nonprofits, there are charities that exist that have these mentorship programs. And I would encourage people to apply for those mentorship programs because they're trained, they're structured, there's, goals that you're trying to achieve, and continue to reach out to people within your organization to say, sometimes when you reach out and immediately say, hey, I want you to mentor me, it doesn't typically land. It doesn't go as well to say, I'd like to pick your brain, I'd like to have a coffee session with you, can we meet once a quarter just to talk through, I want to understand your story, I want to learn more about how you've arrived where you've arrived. And so there, it can be a mentorship conversation versus a mentorship relationship, which can sometimes put people off and say, I don't have time to mentor this person, or I'm not as invested. But I do have time. I do have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to talk to this person. And people, and on LinkedIn, there's so many people who are willing and open to share their stories with someone. In a 20-minute conversation that I have had with numerous immigrant women has transformed my life and changed my life. It doesn't usually have to be this sustained, long, mentorship relationship. Just one conversation can be very impactful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're almost at time, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there something that you wanted to share or talk about that you didn't get a chance either through your presentation or through this Q&A? Is there last words you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the last words is the advocacy and holding people accountable is one of the things that is most difficult for people to do. And a lot of people already, especially when they're in a difficult environment, they approach it from, this is not going to work. This is like something that I'm not going to be able to do. And it does take practice. And usually start with a colleague and then start with a friend. And then you build your way up to be able to have these kinds of questions for your manager. And one of the things that you learn in coaching is the ability to ask powerful questions. And how you ask a question can either make your manager or your manager's manager either defensive or either, approachable. So sometimes when you're advocating for yourself, try not to think about it as you're kind of going to fight with your manager, or you're going to demand something. But like, it's just really about asking questions, asking the one question that you really want to ask, and continue to ask those questions consistently. And then it starts to become more natural for you to be able to advocate for yourselves, and starting in small situations, and then you build yourself up to being able to ask the CEO a question, or attend some kind of a town hall and get up and take the mic and ask a question. That's where you're leading up to when you're advocating for yourself, and it's just about starting small.
I think that was a perfect conclusion to this conversation and really sort of, it's not just about just doing it, it's about just doing it, but do it in a way that matches where you're at, what you need, and how you can build those skills. There are skills that we're building, right, in
Yes.
advocating for ourselves. And I really took that from your presentation. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over prepping for the session. And I really hope people take advantage. Please check out Adobea's work. She does workshops, she does coaching. She's a phenomenal contributor to our community. So please take the time to get to know her and reach out on LinkedIn.